"Can someone get Bradley's lunch out of the fridge?" That was the first sentence I heard from him. Didn't even introduce himself, just pointed at the break room like we were all extras in his personal sitcom. I remember glancing at my project lead, Greg, who raised his eyebrows and mouthed, "Seriously?" That was month 1. By then, I had already spent 10 years inside that office, a space where I knew every squeaky ceiling tile, every trick to make the printer behave, and every undocumented workaround that kept our systems from crashing during high-traffic season. I didn't need a badge to be trusted. My work was my identity. I was the one people called when things went sideways. Back then, before the restructure, we were a machine. Not perfect, but tuned. We had a kind of quiet rhythm. Late nights during launch weeks, potlucks for birthdays, Slack threads filled with dumb memes and project hacks. The team wasn't just coworkers. We had been through system outages, department layoffs, and one absolutely hellish product migration that left half of us sleeping under our desks for 2 nights. I was there with them, tracking vendor contracts, babysitting junior PMs, talking someone down from quitting over a Jira ticket. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Then came the announcement. New leadership. A merger, kind of. We weren't technically acquired, but it sure felt like someone else had their hands on the steering wheel. We were told it was a strategic alignment with a growth-minded affiliate. The press release was full of polished nonsense. The only thing that mattered was the line buried in the 3rd paragraph, welcoming Bradley Langston as Director of Delivery. Delivery, as in the department I had run unofficially for the last 5 years. There was no goodbye from our outgoing VP, just an opportunity elsewhere. And suddenly, Bradley had an office, a budget, and authority over my team. I try not to judge. I really did. Everyone deserves a fair start, and God knows I've had my own rough intros in new roles. But Bradley walked in like he'd been sent by divine order. He scheduled a vision session that first week, rearranged our usual all-hands just to introduce his personal motto, velocity over legacy. He said it 3 times, like a sermon. Someone clapped, probably one of the newer hires who thought we were launching rockets, not managing cross-functional dependencies and contract compliance on 8-year-old architecture. Still, I smiled, nodded, took notes. That's what you do, right? Play the game, wait it out. We've seen VPs come and go. Half the time, they're gone before they can remember your name. But Bradley, he wasn't just a passerby. He brought binders, a reorg chart that cut sideways through our team lines, a list of meetings that were now canceled, a new stand-up protocol that turned every morning into a performance review with clapping and metrics. I was careful. I didn't complain. I asked clarifying questions. When he introduced new tools, I tested them. When he killed our weekly cross-team syncs, I tried hosting informal catch-ups. But one by one, the pieces of what we had built, tools, trust, history, started disappearing. I remember one morning vividly. The dev team was 2 days behind because a third-party API had changed unexpectedly. Normally, I'd escalate, document the impact, but Bradley had declared we were empowering the front line now, so there was no escalation path. When I raised it in our daily stand-up, he cut me off mid-sentence with a cheerful, "Sounds like a learning opportunity. Let's fail forward. Team, fail forward." Greg and I exchanged another look. We were failing, all right, forward, backward, sideways. It didn't matter. The air had shifted. The trust that made people stay late or show up on Sunday because they believed in the mission. Gone. Replaced by jargon and fear. And the worst part, HR acted like Bradley was a vitamin injection. "Give it time," one of them whispered to me in the hallway. "Change is hard, but he's got results." Results, not relationships, not stability, just numbers he hadn't even earned here. I still clung to my tasks, tracked my timelines, mentored the interns and juniors. I told myself it would settle, that we could adapt. But I wasn't adapting. I was eroding, quietly, professionally, bit by bit. Every time he referred to my decade of experience as legacy thinking, I smiled and swallowed the insult. Every time he praised someone for suggesting something we had been doing for years, I smiled and let it go. But inside, I felt it shifting. This wasn't my company anymore. But I wasn't ready to admit that. Not yet. The first thing to go was the knowledge portal, a shared repository we built over the years to document every ugly edge case and vendor quirk that had ever bit us in production. Gone just like that. Bradley claimed it was cluttered with outdated legacy crap and said we'd be rebuilding clean. Except nothing got rebuilt. His version of documentation was shouting contradictory instructions in Slack and expecting someone else to write them down if they survived the week. Next were the process maps, the ones our analyst team had painstakingly crafted after 3 back-to-back failed audits. He called them paralysis by analysis and tossed them in the digital trash. "We're going agile," he said one morning, standing in front of our dry erase board with a Sharpie and a grin that made me want to chew glass. Real-time thinking. High trust, high output. High trust from who? This man had been here 6 weeks and had yet to learn even half the team's names. He gave nicknames instead. Called my lead dev Magic Mike because he fixed a bug during a demo. Called our QA lead Radar because she always caught edge cases. She hated it. Everyone did, but we all smiled. That's what you do, right? One Thursday, I stopped by his office to raise a concern about a cross-department feature he was fast-tracking without review. He was typing an email, didn't look up, just said, "It's called Agile. You'll catch up." Then, after a pause, "Unless you want to slow us down with some more of your legacy protocols." Legacy protocols, like testing or compliance or data integrity. Apparently, velocity forgives all sins. Still, I kept showing up, helping where I could, filling in the gaps, training the newer staff on things Bradley didn't even realize were important, like how the procurement system needed 3 weeks of lead time, not 2, or how the client-facing dashboard had a hard-coded vendor constraint that would crash if you touched it on a Friday. He didn't want to hear it. Worse, he didn't want me to be heard. It started with little things, meeting invites that never included me, even though I'd owned the project 3 years. Skip-level feedback sessions where junior staff were asked how resistant to change their seniors were, metrics dashboards that excluded our team's actual output and replaced it with vague KPIs like collaboration energy and alignment velocity. He started pulling in younger staff, especially those hungry for promotion, and giving them tasks they weren't ready for. When they failed, he blamed the process. When they succeeded, he took the credit. One junior PM, who'd been here 3 months, was suddenly leading delivery transformation. She looked panicked every time I passed her in the hallway. "You're being watched," Greg whispered one day, sliding into the seat next to me during a Friday sync. "He's looking for friction." "What kind of friction?" "The kind he can label as resistance." I didn't respond, but my chest tightened. I'd seen this playbook before, not firsthand, but in case studies, whispered horror stories from industry friends, old Glassdoor reviews, charismatic change agents who burn everything down to make room for their own control. But it still shocked me how fast the rot spread. By month 3, turnover had started. A quiet resignation from one of our senior analysts, no fanfare, just a thanks for everything, in Slack and her desk cleaned out by lunch. She'd been here 8 years, trained half the current staff. He never even said goodbye in person. That was the first crack in the dam. Then our vendor manager, who'd brokered us through 3 brutal pricing wars, was moved to special projects. Translation, nowhere. I asked him if he was okay. He just shrugged and said, "Doesn't matter. This ain't my company anymore." I started noticing HR silence, too. The usual Friday newsletter stopped. No follow-ups after exits. No pulse surveys. I asked our HR partner about it. She gave a thin smile and said, "We're just giving the new leadership some space to implement their vision." Vision, another word for purge. My own calendar started looking like Swiss cheese. Meetings I had founded and run for years vanished overnight. One of the interns I mentored pinged me privately, asking if I'd been let go. "Not yet," I typed. I didn't send it. Instead, I started saving everything. Emails, Slack threads, system logs. Not because I was planning anything, but because I needed to know I wasn't imagining it, that I wasn't going crazy. Because that's what it felt like, standing in the same office, doing the same job, but somehow becoming invisible in real time, watching a culture you helped build get bulldozed by a guy who thought loyalty was a weakness and wisdom was weight. And still, somehow, people clapped. The night it clicked, the office was silent, except for the cursed hum of the vending machine compressor and the rhythmic thump of my heel tapping under the desk. 8:37 p.m. I was fixing a critical path bug that should have never made it out of staging, something Bradley's shiny fast team had rushed through without a single regression test. A basic input sanitization issue, something we had a checklist for, used to have a checklist for. They deployed it live that morning. By lunch, client dashboards were displaying zeros for premium subscriptions. By dinner, 2 clients had sent urgent escalation emails to my inbox, not his. Because even now, with my name scrubbed from the sprint boards and my invite lost in the Slack void, people still came to me when things broke. I didn't even complain, just rolled up my sleeves and did what I've always done, fixed the mess no one else saw coming. When Bradley strolled in around 9:10, he smelled like a steakhouse and arrogance, still in his dress shirt, loosened tie, phone glued to his hand, texting someone, probably named Brett or Connor. He spotted me across the dim office and paused in that doorway like he was stepping onto a tech stage. "That's the attitude I expect," he said, smug as a cat in a dog park. No clock watchers on my team. I didn't look up, didn't need to. I just kept typing, saved the fix, deployed it manually. The CI pipeline they'd modernized kept failing on live pushes. I didn't say anything until he left. Didn't scream, didn't cry. I just sat there and let the quiet settle. And I realized something. This wasn't mine anymore. Not the work, not the team, not the pride I used to carry when people asked what I did for a living. I wasn't leading delivery. I was cleaning up after a parade of bad decisions with a mop no one would admit they needed. I pulled out a notebook from the bottom drawer, the one I used to sketch out workflows or jot down integrations we needed next quarter. I flipped to a blank page, wrote the date, then started listing every instance, every rollback, every process he'd cut, every good person pushed aside. Not to tattle, not even to protect myself, but because I needed to see it. I needed proof that it wasn't just in my head. That week, I created a folder on my desktop, called it FYI. Inside, Slack screenshots, change logs, approval chains, nothing malicious, nothing confidential, just the kind of paper trail someone might want if the wheels came off and people started pointing fingers. But I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning survival. And in the quiet corners of my schedule, off the clock, untracked, I started mentoring again. A few of the new hires had been pinging me privately, asking for help with undocumented systems, legacy workflows that weren't in the new delivery playbook. I told them to meet me after hours. We'd sit in the tiny kitchen, or on Zoom with cameras off, walking through how to build reports that didn't collapse under edge cases, how to patch API calls without breaking data sinks. One night, one of them asked why none of this was being taught formally. I shrugged, because Bradley thinks history is clutter. They looked at me for a long second, then said, "Acts like he invented tech." We both laughed, but not really. Greg joined one of the sessions unannounced, said he just wanted to listen in, but I noticed him nodding when I explained a cache invalidation bug we'd fought years ago. Afterward, he sent me a note. "You're the last grown-up in the room." I didn't feel like a grown-up. I felt like a ghost with admin access. Bradley kept accelerating. More vision decks, more velocity pilots, even started a monthly leadership culture lab, whatever the hell that meant. People went, took selfies, posted hashtags. Meanwhile, I fixed silent fires no one would ever hear about. The thing that broke me wasn't even dramatic. It was Tuesday. He'd fast-tracked a client-facing update that hadn't been caught, then blamed the frontline engineers for the outage, so they lacked adaptability. Never mind that half of them were still learning systems. He dismantled afterward, sent out a company-wide Slack message. "Great job pushing through the noise, everyone. Disruption always feels like chaos before it becomes clarity." He signed it with a rocket emoji. I stared at that sentence, so long my monitor dimmed. Then I closed Slack, opened the FYI folder, added 3 new screenshots, sat back, and for the first time in 10 years, I opened LinkedIn during work hours. Not to apply, just to look, just to remember that I wasn't trapped, that I had a choice. And the longer I stared at the open to work toggle, the more I realized this wasn't about me anymore. It was about a team that still believed in building things, not just breaking them and calling it innovation. It wasn't just the way he cut me off. It was how casual he made it look, like I was an interruption to my own sentence. The first few times it happened in planning meetings, I'd be halfway through explaining a client integration quirk or a dependency that could wreck our rollout schedule, and he'd just raise a hand mid-sentence and pivot. "We'll handle that with flexible logic," he'd say without even looking at me. Then he'd turn to the junior dev across the table and ask them to own the timeline for that task. The poor kid would nod, deer in headlights, knowing damn well they'd need to come to me later to figure out what any of it actually meant. Sometimes he'd misquote me outright, like during a sprint review when he told the VP of Ops that I had approved removing the security validation from our admin panel for demo simplicity. I hadn't. I'd flagged it as a risk in writing, but he said it with that buttery tone of confident fiction, and I wasn't in the room to defend it. When I brought it up after the fact, he gave a tight little smile and said, "You're not seeing the forest, only the trees." What I saw was him stacking matches near an open gas line and calling it a bonfire of innovation. People noticed. Not all of them said anything, but I caught the looks, the quick glances when he'd talk over me, the sudden silence when I walked into a room mid-conversation, the way some of the junior staff would glance toward me when he delegated things they knew were above their pay grade. One even tried to hand a project back to me, discreetly, whispering, "He told me to run it, but I don't think I should." "You shouldn't," I whispered back, "but I'll help you." Greg tried to intervene once, in front of the whole delivery team. Bradley had just reassigned one of my direct reports to shadow ops without explanation. When Greg asked for clarification, Bradley tilted his head and said, "We don't need to justify internal talent shifts to mid-level managers." Mid-level. That was new. I'd been senior staff longer than he'd known how our CMS worked. Greg looked like he wanted to punch something, but he just nodded slowly and sat down. 2 days later, he was pulled from a leadership pilot he'd been preparing for 6 weeks. Refocusing priorities, the email said. Burnout started bubbling, not the usual kind. This wasn't people exhausted from doing too much. It was people crushed under the weight of doing nothing that mattered, being sidelined, gaslit into silence. A product manager broke down during a sync, said she felt like she was haunting her own job. That's when the rumors started. Whispers in the stairwell, Slack DMs with no emojis, just ellipses. One said, "Have you seen what he did at Unified Metrics?" I hadn't. I barely even remembered where he came from, just that it was a turnaround story according to his intro. Then one afternoon, a file landed in my inbox. No subject line, no sender signature, just a single attachment. A PDF titled Langston_reviews.pdf. I clicked it. Glassdoor reviews. Dozens, written in the months before his departure from Unified Metrics, his last company. And every word felt like déjà vu. He creates chaos and blames the wreckage on the staff. Fast-talking and good at shifting blame, especially onto women. Under his vision, we lost 2 department heads, 6 project leads, and 3 clients in 1 quarter. He rewards the loudest person in the room, even when they're wrong. Guts process, calls it velocity, then scrambles when things collapse. I scrolled in silence, page after page. Some names I vaguely recognized, colleagues of colleagues. There was even a reference to a rogue documentation purge that tanked a compliance audit. One line jumped out and stuck to my ribs like a splinter. He doesn't break systems. He convinces you to destroy them for him. I closed the file, sat still for a long time, and then I realized this wasn't mismanagement. It was a pattern. Calculated chaos, manufactured turnover, erasure disguised as evolution. And I was next in line, not because I was underperforming, but because I remembered how the engine used to run before he pulled out all the bolts. The next morning, a peer from finance passed me in the hallway. She paused, looked me up and down, and said softly, "Hey, are you okay?" I smiled, tight professional, yeah, just tired. She didn't nod like someone who believed me. She nodded like someone who had been me. She walked on. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at my ceiling fan and realized I'd stopped believing the situation could be saved. I wasn't boiling anymore. I'd boiled over. Now I was just waiting for the collapse, for the moment, for the click. Bradley had that look on his face again, the one he wore when pretending to listen. Brows pinched together like he was working through a complex calculus problem, but the eyes were empty, scanning for applause. It was Monday morning, 9 days from product launch, and he had just dropped a new deadline like a live grenade in the middle of the war room. 3 fewer days, No extra budget, no extra hands. Silence. Everyone knew it was absurd. The features set wasn't QA'd, the migration scripts hadn't been vetted by infra, and our vendor's API still had a caching issue that caused intermittent failures in live environments. But instead of discussing mitigation or staging fallback plans, he just stood there, smiling like a magician, asking us to clap before he pulled a rabbit from a wood chipper. I glanced at the timeline up on the screen. It was laughable, dangerous even, so I spoke. Bradley, I need to flag something critical. And that was as far as I got. He didn't even let me finish, just raised a hand and stood. Let me make this simple, he said loudly, like he was hosting a game show instead of leading a crisis huddle. It's my way or the highway. No sarcasm, no irony, just those 6 words dropped like a guillotine. Final, authoritarian, meant to humiliate. The room went dead. I looked around, really looked. People I'd mentored, helped land their first jobs, stayed late with when systems crashed or when imposter syndrome chewed their confidence to the bone. 3 of them sat closest. Jenna, Isaac, Rob. I met their eyes one by one, not accusingly, just searching for a flicker of the solidarity we used to have. Nothing. Jenna looked down. Isaac blinked slowly. Rob picked at a hangnail like it was more important than what was happening in front of him. No one moved, and that's when I realized it was already over. This wasn't a workplace anymore. It was a stage, and I was the last actor still trying to follow the original script while the set burned down behind me. I swallowed the lump in my throat, turned back to Bradley. He was already smirking, assuming I'd back down. I didn't. I didn't make a speech, didn't throw a chair. I just whispered, so quietly I'm not even sure everyone heard it. Then I'll take the highway. And I walked out. Not quickly, not slowly, just deliberately. I grabbed my notebook, my half-full water bottle, left the status reports untouched on the table. I didn't even look back when the glass door hissed shut behind me. But I'll never forget the sound it made, that soft click of finality. I didn't go home right away. Drove to the lake, parked, just stared at the water until the lights shifted and the shadows turned blue. I felt numb. Not angry, not triumphant, just stripped down to something raw and hollow. That company had been my second skin for a decade. I'd bled for it, grown in it, found pieces of my identity tangled up in team retros, vendor negotiations, late-night server rebuilds, and onboarding decks scrawled with my handwriting. And in the span of a single sentence, it was gone. He took the culture we built and turned it into a parody of leadership. And when I called out the danger, he offered me a highway like it was a threat, but I took it. And in doing so, something strange happened. The numbness cracked underneath. I didn't feel defeated. I felt clear, because for the first time in a long time, I had chosen myself. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to watch him destroy everything we built while sitting silently in the wreckage. At 7:46 p.m., I was still sitting in my car outside the Thai place near my apartment, too tired to go in, too wired to drive home. My phone buzzed. It was Greg. Text. He's scrambling. 2 devs quit. HR sweating through their polos. I stared at it, reread it, then again. Quit that fast. The last time someone left our team, it took 6 months of interviewing, 3 offers, and a bottle of bourbon to fill the hole. Now people were walking mid-project without even waiting for their next paycheck. I didn't ask anyone to follow me. I hadn't even told most of them I was leaving. I just left. No Slack goodbye, no inbox farewell. I did it quietly, deliberately, alone. But something had shifted. By 9 p.m., another message. Jenna, I'm sorry I didn't say anything today. You didn't deserve that. And then immediately after, I just sent my resignation. I sat up straight. 9:20, 3 more messages. Not from my immediate team, but from people in product and design. Folks I'd worked with, supported, fought for during budget cycles. People who'd felt the ripples of Bradley's chaos, even if they weren't in the blast radius yet. One simply said, submitted. Can't fake respect. By 10:17, Rob, who couldn't meet my eyes that morning, texted me an emoji, just the highway sign, then, you were right. By midnight, Greg called, no greeting, just said, we're at 5 resignations, maybe 6. HR's holding late-night calls, trying to convince folks to reconsider. He chuckled, bitter and tired. Too late. They let it rot too long. I leaned back against the headrest. It didn't feel good. Not exactly. Not like a win. It felt surreal. I hadn't rallied anyone, hadn't staged a walkout, but I'd been the first domino, and now the line was tipping. Even as the messages came in, I could feel the weight settling on my shoulders. This wasn't revenge. I didn't want anyone to burn the place down. But they were leaving, and some of them didn't have backup plans. No offers, no severance, just principle. I wasn't angry anymore. I was scared for them. And somewhere beneath that, a flicker of something like hope, like maybe they remembered what it felt like to matter. Around 1 a.m., I got a LinkedIn message from someone in legal, not a close friend, just a guy I'd shared a conference table with during contract reviews. Leaving too. For what it's worth, you weren't invisible. That one hit harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear it, that someone saw. At 1:43, I got a DM from an old colleague now working at a competitor. Saw some movement on your team. You okay? Wanna talk? I didn't reply right away, because for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I wasn't just reacting. I was considering. That little toggle in my head, the one that had been jammed between survival and silence, clicked into something else. Possibility. Not because I had a plan, but because I wasn't alone anymore. They weren't following me. They were leaving something they no longer recognized. I opened my inbox reflexively, old habit. Still had access. And there it was, subject lines piling up. Resignation. Effective immediately. Notice of termination. 2 weeks. Team realignment, no thank you. Some were one-line emails. Others were full-blown essays. Thoughtful, scathing, surgical. One from a marketing manager I barely knew made me stop breathing for a second. Leadership is not a synonym for dominance. We're not quitting because we're weak, because we remember when this place had a soul, and we won't pretend it still does. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was haunted, but because I was awake, in the truest sense of the word. The fallout had begun, and I wasn't watching from a distance. I had become the fault line. I didn't plan on speaking to her. Honestly, I figured HR would file my departure in some dusty folder labeled attrition and move on like they always did, maybe with a canned survey and a checkbox labeled pursuing new opportunities. But 2 days after I walked out, my phone rang, unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Hey, she said softly, like we were already in the middle of a conversation. It's Tara from HR. I'd met Tara maybe twice, once during a benefit enrollment queue, and another time when she asked if I'd join a mentoring initiative that never got off the ground. She was one of the few people in that department who didn't sound like she'd been trained in customer service apologies and exit survey euphemisms. She sounded tired, human. I'm not calling to ask you to come back, she said. I just wanted to hear it from you. So I told her, not the dramatic version, not a takedown, just the truth, that I stayed late to fix problems caused by chaos I wasn't allowed to speak about, that I watched a system we'd built with care be gutted for the sake of optics, that the day I left, I didn't even feel angry, I felt hollow, not because I didn't care, but because I cared so much for so long with so little oxygen left in the room. There was a long pause on the line. Then Tara said, You weren't the only one keeping this place together. We knew. I didn't expect that. It landed somewhere behind my sternum, heavy but kind. We've been tracking the exits, she continued. There's a pattern. This isn't just delivery anymore. It's across departments. We've raised it. The phrasing wasn't casual. It was structured, purposeful. Raised it with who? I asked. Another pause. Let's just say the board doesn't like surprises. It was the first moment I realized something might actually stick, that Bradley's freefall might have been noticed by people who didn't care about Slack threads or retro scores, but did care about cost, exposure, reputation. The quiet architecture of accountability was creaking back to life. That night, I opened my email. It had become a sort of ritual, watching the waves of fallout ripple across my inbox, like tide patterns left behind after a storm. There was one new message subject. Thank you, from Megan G. I remembered her, one of the spring interns, shy, smart as hell, always scribbling in notebooks during sprint planning. She once asked me how to push back on a manager's request without sounding difficult. I gave her my 3-line playbook. Lead with clarity, anchor and impact, never apologize for accuracy. I opened her email. You probably don't remember this, but once you told me that pushing back wasn't rebellion, it was respect in motion. I've carried that with me. I resigned yesterday, not because of you, because of me, because I finally realized that staying quiet wasn't loyalty, it was slow erasure. And I watched you walk out with your head up. That's what I'll remember. I read that 3 times, then again. That's when the pride hit. Not the chest-puffing kind, not vindication, something softer, something like relief that someone saw, that someone learned, that something would outlast the mess. The next morning, a contact from finance pinged me. You didn't hear this from me, but a quiet audit's happening. They're pulling calendar logs, project tracking, resource churn, vendor friction points. It's not just performative. This feels surgical. Another message, this one from legal. Word is the board's asking questions, not just about culture, about risk exposure. Bradley, for all his charisma and acronyms, had triggered more than just attrition. He triggered scrutiny, not the kind you deflect with vision decks, the kind that comes with questions like, what do you mean you pushed an update without documentation? Or, why were 10 key staff gone in 1 week? And suddenly, I wasn't just a ghost with admin access anymore. I was a witness, not just to what had gone wrong, but to the people who still cared. People like Tara, Megan, Greg, people who chose truth, even if it came wrapped in loss. And for the first time since the door clicked shut behind me, I felt something I hadn't in months. Like maybe we weren't finished. Bradley walked into the office like it was any other Tuesday, whistling some off-brand pop song, twirling a keycard lanyard like it was a VIP pass to a party no one else was invited to. Had his usual cold brew in one hand and a grin that said, I've already won. Same press shirt, same performance swagger, same disregard for the cratered morale trailing behind him like the stench of a rotting confidence trick. He didn't notice the silence at first, didn't notice that the intern desk was empty, that Jenna's seat was unoccupied, that the whiteboard in conference room B, the one we used to scribble launch blockers on, was wiped clean, except for a single post-it note in the corner that read in Sharpie, Godspeed. He kept walking into his office, sat down, logged in, and that's when it hit him. Later, I heard from Greg, who had stuck around just long enough to watch the spectacle unfold, that Bradley froze mid-click, not in slow-motion disbelief, in sudden physical stillness, like someone had slammed the brakes inside his nervous system. 12 unread resignation emails. 12. 8 of them from core staff, the very people he leaned on to push through impossible deadlines, the ones he forgot to thank, the ones he talked over, the ones he quietly replaced in meetings with underpaid yes-men and freshly printed acronyms. It wasn't just the count, it was the content. These weren't polite two-liners with HR-safe phrasing. These were thought-out declarations, detailed, poised. Some cited ethical disagreements. Some pointed directly to sustained erosion of process integrity. One simply read, I refuse to build someone else's delusion with my time. Greg said Bradley sat there for a long time, staring at his screen like it had betrayed him. Then he stood, marched. Yes, marched, straight to HR, didn't schedule anything, didn't knock, just stormed into Tara's office like a man expecting to be handed a broom and told to sweep it all back together with a memo and a motivational gift. Tara didn't flinch. She looked up from her monitor and said, 15 minutes. Conference room 3. Bring notes. That was it, not a second more. I wasn't there, of course. I was outside the building, across the street. In fact, sitting on a bench with a lukewarm coffee, watching the glass facade catch the morning light like nothing was broken inside. But I could feel it, the shift, that moment when a storm realizes it's no longer in control of the sky. I wasn't there to gloat. I didn't text anyone, didn't refresh my inbox. I just sat, breathing, and let the stillness wash over me. Not peace, not yet, but something adjacent to it. The building that once held my entire world now looked different, smaller somehow, not because I'd shrunk, but because I'd stepped back far enough to see how much I'd outgrown it. Inside, Bradley was unraveling. Outside, I was remembering who I used to be before I started trading self-respect for job stability. They say some collapses happen in slow motion. This one didn't. It snapped, a rope pulled too tight, a facade leaned on too hard, and the sound of it, though muffled by glass and distance, was unmistakable. Bradley came into conference room 3 like he always did. Fast, confident, reeking of expensive cologne and unearned certainty. The tie was tighter today. His jaw clenched like a man preparing to dominate a negotiation he didn't realize he was losing by default. Tara was already seated, a manila folder open in front of her, 2 sheets of paper laid flat like evidence. She didn't offer coffee, didn't ask how his morning was, just gestured to the seat across from her without a word. He took it, still riding the last fumes of authority, tapping his pen like a war drum. "Let's talk about the resignations," he said, voice clipped. "I assume we're doing retention outreach." Tara didn't respond immediately. She reached into the folder and pulled out a stapled packet. 12 resignation letters, neatly printed and stacked. She slid it across the table toward him. Bradley blinked, then again. Same letters that had been blinking in his inbox, now in black and white, real, tactile. He picked up the top page like it might burn his fingers. "This," she said, calm and quiet, "is what your way looks like." He opened his mouth, closed it, then fumbled for some kind of foothold. "Look, with any transformation, there's going to be friction. These people, some of them were just uncomfortable with discipline. We had inefficiencies, dead weight." Tara didn't flinch, just raised a single eyebrow. He leaned forward, like proximity might give his words more weight. "I'm bringing clarity to this place, accountability. You can't coddle legacy teams forever." Tara's expression didn't change. "Bradley," she said, almost kindly, "you're out of staff." That stopped him. "No. Look, I still have—" He paused, mentally scanning a list that was already outdated. He couldn't say Greg. He'd left. Couldn't say Jenna, gone. Couldn't say the junior PMs. One was out on stress leave, the other transferred internally without telling him. He was alone, and it showed. Tara let the silence breathe, then added evenly, "We'll be notifying the board." He tried to push back, muttered something about needing alignment, about culture being hard to quantify, about attrition being a natural part of growth cycles. But the words weren't weapons anymore. They were flailing limbs in water that had already turned cold. The meeting ended with no handshake, no agreement. Just a man sitting in a chair that wasn't his anymore, staring down a paper trail of everything he broke, one quiet departure at a time. Outside the glass wall, staff walked by without glancing in, not out of malice, out of indifference. The spell had broken. He left the room 10 minutes later, slower than he came in. Not limping, exactly, but hollow, like someone searching for a story to tell that would make this look like strategy instead of failure. But there was no story left, no legacy, no army, no excuse, just a vacuum, the kind you can feel from across the building, the kind that hums when something heavy disappears. There were no dramatic exits, no viral LinkedIn posts, just 12 chairs left empty, an inbox full of farewells, and the quiet realization spreading like smoke through upper management that the most dangerous kind of collapse isn't loud. It's organized, measured, deliberate. Bradley had mistaken fear for loyalty, mistaken silence for submission, mistaken leadership for control. And by the time he realized the difference, the people worth leading were already gone. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco on Warth Stories. Stay tuned for the next one.